Welcome to Jam Sessions, an open access, international, and multilingual podcast project of the Climate Justice Program of IFSW. Upcoming series will discuss climate justice, eco-social work, eco-social worldviews, and ways that social workers are moving this forward in the co-creation of a new eco-social world. Together, the co-hosts seek to learn from each other and an array of international invited guests as we discuss challenges, successes, lessons learned for the living out of our aims of promoting climate justice in the world. Welcome to the inaugural episode of this Jam Sessions podcast series called The Wisdom of Our Elders. I'm Dr. Meredith Powers, founder and director of the Climate Justice Program for IFSW. I'm excited to be hosting this inaugural session with my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Fred Besthorn. Dr. Besthorn is a professor emeritus at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas. Dr. Besthorn has been involved both personally and professionally in developing and encouraging social workers' involvement in the environmental justice movement. While serving in academic positions at 3 major universities, Dr. Besthorn has written extensively on the interface between social work theory and practice and emerging ecological and environmental paradigms. His main focus has been on the linkage between deep ecology and ecofeminism, and the ways in which they may help inform and transform social work theory and practice. We hope you enjoy this session, and we invite your feedback. Thanks for joining me today, Fred. It's a pleasure to be with you, to always speak with you, and to always learn from you and the amazing wisdom that you've shared with me as my mentor over the years during my dissertation and beyond as a new scholar in this field. And I'm just excited to have you on Jam Sessions today as our inaugural guest for the Wisdom of Our Elders. So thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure, Meredith. It's my honor. It's just a wonderful opportunity.
Well, I hope you're doing well today. And we have a few questions that we've already discussed. And if they kind of ebb and flow as they need to, we just want to hear from you. And I just want to sort of sit at your feet for a moment and just learn from what all your experiences have been. Obviously, it's just a short sound bite of your entire life, all your expertise, but whatever we end up hearing today, we just welcome that. And thank you for taking the time to do this. Let's start, I guess, kind of going back to your childhood experiences connected with the natural world. What was most meaningful to you about these? Maybe how they've impacted your personal life or your work and career choices?
That's an excellent question, Meredith. I grew up in a very small rural farming and oil community in the plains of central Kansas. And if you've ever been to Kansas, you know it's pretty flat, not many trees, not the kind of wilderness experience that most people think of. But for me as a child, there was a very small area, very, very close to where I lived in this small town that had trees surrounded by a Kansas wheat field. And this was a place where I often went to get away, to in some ways escape from a less than advantageous environment in which I grew up. And I found in this area a kind of spiritual connection with the natural world and with a divine being. I didn't grow up in a religious family. We weren't involved in church activities or anything like this, but I had a real keen sense of the divine, of the mystical in the world. And it was in this natural setting that I found right next to this very large cottonwood tree with these waving wheat, acres and acres surrounding it, where I found comfort and solace and really an emerging sense of awe around the wonder of the natural world. And I think for me as a child, it was those experiences in the natural world, even as limited as it may have been, it was those experiences in the natural world which helped me develop this sense of the mysterious, of the mystical, of the wonder of the universe. And so one of the lessons that came out of that for me, I think, as I grew older, is that we don't all, many people don't have the opportunity to escape into wild places and that kind of thing. But really, our connection to the natural world can develop in the most seemingly insignificant places: a green space, a tree, a grassy area. And that was true for me. And I always hearken back to those moments in my early childhood and how impacted adolescent and adult years. And I would think back at those moments and opportunities that I had just to experience the awe of nature as a real formative part of my development. And of course, as I moved into professional life in a number of different careers, I never lost that sense of the majesty and the wonder and the awe of nature that evolved in those early years. And it was a tremendous, and always has been a tremendous part of my life evolution, I guess, and my understanding my place in the natural world and my place with other people on this tiny, tiny orb floating around in the Milky Way. So it's been very impactful. It's been a cause for me to be as involved as I can be in making sure that children have opportunities to experience the natural world and to be actually out in the natural world and to learn from it. It's been a wonderful part of my life, and I've never forgotten it, nor will I ever.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. A story that I haven't heard you share before. It also reminded me of being outside in nature with my daughter on a daily basis, as much as we can, really, and how, I acknowledge the privilege of that, the safety that we have, the green spaces, the unpolluted, safe spaces, and the air quality, and just enjoying the woods, taking walks. It's not something that I take for granted, and it's certainly something that I do have eco grief around, how's it going to look in 10 years from now, and certainly how it looks currently for a lot of people in different places. But that's so incredible. The part about the divine as well, I guess it kind of leads us into this next conversation around worldviews. For me personally, through my journey of exploring my work on environmental issues as a social worker, and it kind of got me looking at worldviews and how that informs the way that we may want to embrace our roles and responsibilities in a professional way. And a lot of it, might be informed by our worldviews. Something that's maybe more ecocentric and less human-centered is certainly something that I'm trying to move in that direction and to embrace and to promote for the profession to embrace as a whole, as we look at these solutions on climate justice and beyond, and all the interrelated justice issues. Reflecting on your worldview, is that something you can maybe share? Has your worldview shifted over time, or these early experiences with nature and the divine and the mysterious aspects of the universe, has that impacted your worldview from that early age and how you now interact with the world?
Yes, I think so, Meredith. I think when you're a child like that, you're not thinking about worldviews and paradigms and that kind of thing. You're certainly just focused in on what you're experiencing through your senses, through what you see and smell and taste and that kind of thing. But I think as you get older and you reflect upon those more tactile experiences with the natural world, that tends to evolve in a more refined kind of worldview. And I think as I moved into adulthood, particularly as I did theological training and went to seminary and did that kind of religious background training before I entered into academia, I think one of the most concerning things for me was the absence of connection between the Judeo-Christian and particularly the Christian heritage in meaningful ways with the natural world. I mean, obviously there are references to the natural world in the historical text, but I often found that there was also an overriding kind of viewpoint that was very anthropocentric or very human-centered, that human beings had the right to name and control and manipulate and use the natural world for their benefit. And that always struck me, I think, hearkening back to my childhood, always struck me as a kind of perverted view of the sense of awe and spirit and the mystical that I experienced in the natural world. And so as I began to read and think more about alternative theoretical perspectives and worldview perspectives, I began to find that there were a lot of people out there who were talking about a much more expanded view of the natural world and that interconnectedness between humanity and the natural world, and the importance of feeling that at a sensate level, feeling it in your bones, in your heart, in your soul, and in your spirit. And so I think my worldview developed through reading lots of poetry, reading lots of writers like Edward Abbey, Wendell Berry, others, and began to develop my own perspective with respect to how we are so deeply interconnected. We are not apart from nature. We are nature, and we have a responsibility to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural world. And so it's hard for me to say that there was one thing or even a few things that has had an influence. It was a combination of lots of different things. And of course, as I moved into academic settings, that whole perspective began to get more formalized. And, the influence that the deep ecology and ecofeminist movement had on me was very significant. Really, I don't know if it changed so much as it's just become more refined and has evolved in a much more specific kind of formalized way. If anything, it's gotten more hardened, probably isn't the right word, but I've become much more radical as I get older about the environmental justice movement and the ways in which social work can and should be involved in that movement as we approach tipping points, or perhaps even have moved past those tipping points in terms of the climate crisis. And so it's actually, it's impacted every area of my life in terms of professionally and personally. And I guess the struggle, like many, is looking around. I'll be 71 years old here coming up in just a month or so. And so I can still remember back 50 years when being in the natural world meant walking in creeks and seining for crawdads and doing all those wonderful things that kids do, putting frogs in your pockets. And I can see how that natural world has changed significantly in those 50 years. And I also, like you, Meredith, I worry about whether we are getting so far away from what the natural world could be that we lose a kind of consciousness, and we come to accept the way things are because we don't have any greater sense or any other sense of what things could be for us. And so I certainly am concerned by that, and even more so now as we struggle with the real world ramifications of climate change.
That's so powerful, especially thinking about how children, I didn't read the book, but I'm aware of it, there's something called nature deficit disorder.
Yes, by Richard Kahn. He's a psychologist, an ecological psychologist. I've had communications with him through the years, and I think there's a lot to be learned from that, because we do lose touch with that. But yeah, I think that's very true.
Well, and when I'm teaching my classes about environmental justice and the topics that elicit obviously lots of growth and acknowledgement of our situations, it also can lead to eco grief and climate anxiety amongst my students. And I try to balance that by giving them resources to, acknowledge and foster their connections to nature. I'm not saying reconnect with nature, as I'm learning my own worldview is shifting and my own vocabulary is shifting. So I don't think of it as reconnecting with nature because we were never disconnected. We are nature,
Yes.
as you said, but trying to encourage my students to foster their connections in nature and natural settings, or bringing, natural aspects into their dorm room or into their lives. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at some leaves that I picked up with my daughter on a walk in the woods, or some rocks that I've, found at various locations in my travels that, bring me comfort and remind me of my connections, as a way to balance their grief and their anxiety as they're writing their papers about these environmental justice topics. I also require that they do at least 1 hour for self-care that is using ecotherapy activities. And, I have students from a range of walk of lives and worldviews, but sometimes I'm just kind of floored by the number of students who just don't spend time outdoors. They go through the outdoors to get to a car, to get to a vehicle, and then go to the next place, that they're just inside all the time. I've had students tell me, oh yeah, this was the first time I've ever just sat on a park bench and watched a squirrel, things like that. So it really does distress me, the disconnections or the false sense of disconnections that we have created in our industrial revolution type society that is so human-centered, but it's also just, I guess, creating a lot of the problems that we feel for our own mental health, our despair, our lack of connection spiritually. I remember going to a conference one time, and a colleague had presented her work with, she herself is an Indigenous scholar, and her work with Indigenous populations around water right. I remember she had this quote from someone, and it said, "The river is my relative." And I thought that to me was probably the biggest indicator that my worldview was not in that what I understand now as like a kinship perspective. I kind of grew up with a different worldview, with yes, we're, over nature, we name nature, we are good stewards of nature for ourselves and future generations, but it wasn't that we were part of nature. We were certainly outside and above, versus this kinship idea of a river being a relative. I mean, that was so powerful to me, and really was a pivotal point in me starting to investigate how worldviews shape our connections and our actions, and trying to be responsible. Again, responsibility not from a sense of being a steward, but responsibility in the sense that we have a relationship with other beyond human, more than human aspects of nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's difficult, I think, because we are trapped in a socioeconomic system, a neoliberal capitalist system, which doesn't value nature beyond its resource potential for us as human beings. And so we're stuck between this dualistic world, a world in which we are obliged to be a part of. We can't escape neoliberal capitalism and its focus on individualism and its focus on separateness and distinctiveness and bifurcating ourselves from the world, while at the same time having this deep felt sense, or an emerging felt sense, that things aren't right and things are collapsing, and our souls, our hearts are experiencing this deep level of disconnect, as many have talked about, and you have talked about, Meredith, Joanna Macy and Charlene Spretnek, and others have talked about this ecological grief, this feeling that we are losing something of our world and of ourselves. And I think for me, because I experienced the natural world as a child in very small and intimate ways, even following ants around the yard and seeing where they began and where they ended up, and doing that for hours on end. Neighbors probably thought I was kind of a weird kid, I guess, but I enjoyed doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I felt it very deeply, and so it was later that the more theoretical and worldview paradigm perspective began to emerge in my life. But I never lost that sense of the real intimate connection that I am nature. I am one part of this wonderful ecosystem that we're a part of, which obviously as time went on seems to be dying around us. So I wished I had an answer around, but I feel that sense that we are trapped in a socioeconomic system that makes it very, very difficult for us to get too far outside of that to make the kinds of needed changes in order to save the planet, and to save ourselves, and to save what is remaining of wildlife and natural ecosystems.
Yeah, I definitely have been learning more about that myself from various, authors, conversations, including with yourself. Another mentor, Jeff Peters, has, taught me a lot around that growth ideology is really where we're situated. The Industrial Revolution, neo-capitalism, all of that is kind of still stuck in this growth ideology, which even, I wrote about with a few colleagues who, if we look at the efforts that we're trying to make on a global level, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, that, in one way, it's amazing that people come together, that they're trying to find similar vocabulary to quantify topics, to work on outcomes, but it's still within this growth ideology. And I don't think that we're going to get to those solutions that create, true, meaningful change if we're still within that worldview, that human-centric paradigm, and within the growth ideology. So I think that's what, I'm pushing so hard and trying to embrace for myself and trying to promote within the profession and beyond, is this need to shift. If we don't already come from, various worldviews that are more ecocentric, then how can we shift and embrace this so that it informs, the economic paradigms and the ideologies that we follow, and we have our solutions match those types of theories, rather than just being stuck trying to create band-aids for, basically we're still part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, part of that growth ideology is this idea of the technological fix, that if given enough time and enough people engaged in the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit, that will come up with a technological fix for the environmental issues that we face. And of course, history has taught us that our efforts at making an environment or technological fixes for really difficult problems doesn't always work out very well at all. And so I think, unfortunately, there's still a lot of reliance on that. We can fix our way out of this without changing the underlying structures of the, neoliberal hyper-capitalist system that, is just continuing to push on in terms of, carbon extraction and all the other things involved with it. So I certainly have my doubts about that.
Well, and I guess that's why I'm thinking that, I kept trying to follow it backwards, like you said, and what it got at was your worldview and how that shapes which ideology and which path you take to try to. And so that's kind of why I'm at this point of saying, okay, if we can shift to embrace, more eco-social worldviews. I mean, many Indigenous populations already have these and are enduring and continuing to offer us these solutions from various worldviews, that it's not about technology and continuing down this growth ideology, human-centric platforms, but it's a whole different way of thinking. And that's really what hoping to encourage and create platforms around conversations and trying to implement in my own life personally with my family and with my students. That's something, I guess, that brings me hope, knowing that there are actual people in the world that are doing it, that have been doing it for, since time immemorial, that we don't have to figure out what the solution is. We just have to acknowledge that the solutions already exist, honor the people who already have these expertise, and bring them to the forefront and see how we can learn from them and implement them in the various, contexts and localities. in a way that honors that ecosystem locally and the people as part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's well said and absolutely correct. I think the irony of the modern Western theoretical worldviews is that somehow or another we think that we have created this new ecological paradigm when in fact it has existed for thousands upon thousands of years within indigenous and aboriginal cultures around the world, both in North America and everywhere else. And so we haven't invented this. We have in some ways discovered it or rediscovered something that's already existed there. But unfortunately, I think that goes a little bit part and parcel with that anthropocentric, that all knowledge flows from west to east idea, when in fact, these kinds of connectedness worldviews have been in existence for, as you say, time immemorial. We in the West and in the North are rediscovered some of that. But we certainly didn't create it. It has been there all along, and I think we have so much more to learn from cultures and peoples who have been practicing this kind of ecological connectedness for generation after generation.
I definitely have learned a lot from the now popular book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Her work and several others have just been so instrumental in my own development and realization again that my worldview needs to shift, that it needs to be broadened and be more ecocentric and kin-centered. Several of my friends, just all of these conversations that I'm having are opening up. And even for me, teaching my own daughter aspects that I didn't necessarily learn, not to any fault of my parents. It just happens to be my culture of origin didn't teach me these worldviews. And so now I'm just hungry for it, but also very mindful and kind of taking pause to sift through what I did originally believe. And like you said, you were a kid, you didn't necessarily call it a worldview and didn't know you had one until you just started making it a little bit more explicit later in life. And I think that's the stage I'm at and trying to figure out how I can embrace it. And then also for me at this point in my academic career and opportunities to impact students and impact the profession at large, perhaps, with helping us to embrace this, ecological worldviews and try to write it into our curriculum to infuse it, to really just have people who, again, we're so saturated within this anthropocentric state of being that it's hard sometimes. But I feel like maybe those are the places that I find hope and find that there is something worth working towards and that there are, solutions. I don't know if there's other aspects that bring you hope in the midst of all of this. I know that we on various occasions have shared and commiserated in our own eco grief and almost at times eco nihilism, but I don't know if there's other aspects that you can think of that bring you hope at this stage in life and that you could share with me and with others.
Yeah, I think sometimes today hope is a very precious commodity. I am a big believer in the idea that if without hope, we cannot survive as a species. And so, but I think it's difficult. I guess if anything, adds to my sense of hope is the fact that the narrative, the awareness of, the engagement of a whole new generation worldwide, both here in North America and around the world, of a whole new generation of young people who are very aware of how critical it is for us to take action in terms of climate crisis, and how critical it is for us to take action in terms of the way in which we understand our socioeconomic systems, particularly within the Western world. That gives me great hope that there is this younger generation out there who are really putting feet to their commitments. And while it's slow and it's hard fought, my hope is that it will bear fruit as the years go on, because reality is we have precious few years left, I think, before the climate crisis reaches that point where the significant impacts are going to start showing up on every continent every year, and obviously it will have the most profound impact upon poor and marginalized populations. So that gives me hope. The younger generation, I think there is within the political sphere a much deeper awareness of the importance of us taking action on climate crisis and sustainable development. But it's kind of a 2-step forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I'm not sure which sometimes in terms of the political direction, but that's been a big change that gives me hope. And within our profession, Meredith, of social work, which I have loved for many decades and am very committed to, and that is the ways in which this topic has really began to grow and deepen and strengthen within social work amongst practitioners and students and academics and researchers and otherwise. And that gives me hope too, because social work we probably have less influence than what we'd like to have, and perhaps less influence than what we think we have, but we do have influence.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged by the emergence of that deeper sense of the importance of ecological consciousness to what we do as social workers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, some of your writings certainly influenced me during my work on my dissertation topic in this area. And I reached out to you, and you were, so kind and helping to mentor and be on my committee. So I certainly have felt hope, knowing that you have come before me and many others have put in some time and effort to think on these topics within social work and how we can also move it beyond. And yeah, I agree. I'm definitely inspired by my students many times.
Yes.
Honestly, I say that teaching is part of my self-care because I'm able to help foster their skill development and expertise so that they can go out and make change in the world. And I'm not having to do it all myself. There's solidarity in numbers that, they might be passionate about various topics that I'm not necessarily as passionate about, but I'm excited that someone does care about, and I want to help them do the best that they can and kind of launch them out into that with the right skill set and values and ideally worldview. If I can help assist them in assessing their worldview and seeing what they may need to do to shift, to embrace, and certainly becoming involved in voting. I always encourage my students around that, the opportunity and the privilege that we have for civic engagement and how we can, become involved in systems in order to disrupt and transform them, even if we don't think that they're the perfect system, but that we can make some waves, make some change as social workers.
I totally agree with being retired now. I miss being with my students, and I miss hearing their stories, and I miss taking them out on what I would refer as nature walks or other things, but they were perhaps more than that. All through my academic career, that was a practice in my classes, were to take students out to whatever wild places that we could find, and they were required not to bring their phones. They had to take off watches or anything else, Fitbits and they just walked and stopped and listened and observed. And I talked a lot about, if we just pay attention, you can hear the voice of nature, but you got to be quiet enough in order to do that.
Yeah.
And so those are always wonderful experiences. And I've had so many students through the years go on to do so many wonderful things in terms of finding ways to integrate their social work practice and their environmental consciousness. And it's heartening for me. And so I, like you, gain a lot of hope from that. But I don't want to neglect. I think this whole idea of ecological grief is very significant, and I wonder sometimes if, and we hear a lot in the popular media platforms around the increase in issues of mental health and depression and anxiety amongst young people, and I wonder sometimes if there isn't this really unspoken sense of ecological grief that is a part of that. And I know sometimes for me, when I first read about this with Joanna Macy and Charlene Spretnak and others who wrote about this, I began to think about, my goodness, how much in my own personal mental health is impacted by my awareness of a dying world, of a dying earth, and that kind of permeates at times that sense of grief. And I wonder sometimes if there isn't that dimension in the current crisis of mental health that we hear so.
Yeah, I would venture to say that even, our false disconnect from nature in the aspects of those of us who work and live indoors and air conditioning and are less outside with nature, even if there wasn't a climate crisis looming around us, that right there would be enough to create these spiritual and mental health problems that I think we don't even, it's this homesickness. We don't even know that there is a home and a place in the world that we belong, but we just don't even know what we're homesick for sometimes.
Yeah. Right. And it's a hidden kind of grief. It's deeply felt, but it's not clearly visible or tied to anything that we typically tie grief to in the normative sense. And it makes it difficult to, as you say, and are alluding to articulate that homelessness, that disconnect from something that is deeply important and meaningful that we don't have, even, as you say, apart from the climate crisis. But I think even if we didn't have a climate crisis, to continue down that road, we would end up at the climate crisis,
right?
Just as we have now.
Good point. Well, and again, that homesickness that I'm speaking of may not be something for everyone. I mean, people who have deep connection and sense of place, with various eco-social worldviews and various people groups, they may not experience that homesickness, but now might experience it if they're dealing with displacement, having to migrate, or their children not wanting to be in that area because they don't have the economic opportunities, and they out migrate, and then they lose their sense of culture and place, and maybe even languages. So I know that definitely is happening currently in various parts of the world, and just not part of my own worldview and perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
I was thinking too, and when you were talking about the nature walks, I obviously love being outdoors myself and have class outside as much as I can with my students. And, I love to take them on a nature walk to see there's a tree in our area that was part of the Underground Railroad. And it's a very important site and on some Indigenous land. And we take this walk, and one of my colleagues, a dear friend, Dr. Omar Ali, leads us on this walk and talks about our connections with nature and during, slavery within the United States and all of the different aspects. It's a phenomenal experience, and just seeing it through my students' eyes every time, it just awakens me, and I learn in different ways. It's just a beautiful thing. And also just recently started a connection with a local green burial association here in my hometown. And I take my students there for usually our first class, thinking about there is an end in sight for these bodies that we're dwelling in, and, talk to them about our consumption patterns throughout the course of someone's life. And maybe that would help us reassess, what we want for ourselves and what our goals are and what we're working for, why you're in school, why you're showing up to classes, and what you hope to gain in a career. And, think about the peak aspects of our production and consumption, and also considering our worldviews maybe earlier on. So,
you reminded me of, how significant, just read a story on Harriet Tubman and her life of leading enslaved people through the backwoods and marshes of northern Maryland into Pennsylvania, and how keenly connected she was to the natural world, and how that connection to the natural world was a very important piece of this 100-mile trek through the wilderness, leading in enslaved peoples from Maryland. And had she not had that really intimate connection with the natural world, it would have been far, far more difficult, perhaps impossible, for her to do the work that she was doing during that time in her life. And it was just, once again, a reminder of
very, very
the ways in
very
which
deeply connected.
nature informs us, enlivens us, encourages us, even if we're not totally and completely aware of that or conscious of that.
Yeah. In fact, the first time I went to see the tree was with a neighbor and her children and my daughter. And I came home that evening and just in tears wrote a poem in honor of the tree, that the role that it played, and the idea that we were there during daylight and in freedom and celebrating our journey walking through the woods, but others didn't have that experience in nature. And I understand that, that's something not everyone considers the natural world a safe place, and for many reasons, rightfully so.
Yes.
That was a very powerful experience for myself, and then seeing my students experience through that as well.
Yes.
Well, are there other aspects that you continue to do that sort of incorporate different aspects of nature or ecotherapy that have sustained you over the years or continue to sustain you?
Well, sure. There's many things that I, in small ways, not being involved in academic life any longer after retirement, I've had a lot more time to be involved in just small things in my own part of the natural world in which I find myself in my yard, in my neighborhood. Wendell was a great influencer on my ideas early on in my career, along with many, many others. But certainly, and he talked a lot about the importance of knowing and understanding and limiting our connection to space and place to such a degree that we begin to know it intimately. And he was talking about that in terms of farming and other things. But I always found a lot of resonance with that with me, that even if you have a small space like I do here, but I spent a lot of time. Obviously, I love trees, and my neighbors are probably going to turn me into somebody because I keep planting more and more trees and nurturing them.
That's great.
There's no tree. My wife says you will save a tree no matter what. We had a big old locust tree, one of the ones that had the big old thorns, and most people cut them down because they can be kind of nasty if you step on one of them. Of course, I was out there all summer long and through the fall nurturing that thing to keep it growing, because I just love trees, and I'm going to find everywhere I can to plant as I can and to keep as many growing as I possibly can. But yeah, I do that, and I'm involved in some small groups here at our local faith community, a part of an environmental justice committee at our church, and we're in the planning stage of doing some things in our community around that. And so it's the small things, and obviously I do some meditative practice and then include the natural world and that kind of thing. And so I keep it small, but I try to pay attention more closely than I really had time to do when I involved professionally. I wrote an article some years ago on insects, and I pay attention to insects, and insects are a part of my worldview. And so I don't kill them. If there's one in the house, I escort it out as best I can.
Yeah, we try that.
And just those little things that remind me of every life, sentient and otherwise, has a right to be.
Mm-hmm.
And who am I to say you're in my space and so I'm going to kill you? And so that's become a more important part of my life. And now I still struggle with spiders, I have to admit, but I'm working on that with them. And so I've just learned to say, okay, it's fine that you're in my space, but I would really appreciate it if you would just move a little further down the road here or down the garage or wherever you might be. I have no problem with you. Please don't have a problem with me. And, as a reminder again, it's not the natural world so much the natural habitat. It's that we have abridged their spaces and we've gotten into their worlds so closely. And then they become a problem because we've infringed upon their space, and they have a right to be there. They have a right to live. And I'm a firm believer by faith that all things have a kind of emotion, a kind of wisdom, whether or not we can hear it. I've just been reading a book, The Hidden Life of Trees. And
I was going to ask you if you had read that. That just reminded me when you were talking about planting trees and caring for them, if you had enjoyed that book yet. It was tremendous to me.
It is. Yeah, I'm reading it now, and I'm just it's wonderful, and I'm reading it slow and it just soaking in all the wisdom. It's reading of what I've thought all along in many ways. But yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, there's another book that you may also enjoy that was, along that lines for me, but just so powerful, and it's called The Entangled Life: How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. And that one, to me, probably gave me a lot of hope, just realizing all that's going on in the world that I don't even know is happening, and yet it's happening in order to keep the world functioning and going. And it has nothing to do with what I can do or not do, or it's way beyond my control or even, cognate of. So it just really kind of inspired me and took a lot of pressure off of me that while we as human species would like to preserve ourselves as a species in this, ecosystem, there's so much more functioning going on. Yeah, you might enjoy that.
Well, in a strange way, Meredith, perhaps strange, I don't know. One thing that gives me hope is that should we end up as a species committing mass suicide, of our species, one of the hopeful things is that the earth and the ecosystems around us will go on and will replenish and will revitalize, and it will go on quite readily without us.
Yes.
And that, in a strange sort of way, gives me hope.
Yeah, I've heard, people say that the human species is a parasite on this planet. And at times, I certainly see that. And other times I try to be a little bit more hopeful and just try to say that we're part of it. We're part of this ecosystem, and that it needs us as well. But I love your thought of the insects. I need to read whatever article it was that you wrote, and it reminded me of this poem by Rudy Francisco about a spider. It's really short. I'll read it. It says, "She asked me to kill the spider. Instead, I get the most peaceful weapons I can find. I take a cup and a napkin, I catch the spider and put it outside and allow it to walk away. If I am ever caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, just being alive and not bothering anyone, I hope I am greeted with the same kind of mercy."
Amen.
That's just
I love that.
Powerful to me. When you mentioned your spiritual connections with nature, your understanding of a presence of a divine being or the mysterious aspects of the universe, it's not something that we do well within the profession of social work, incorporating into our theories and our practice with clients and communities. It's almost as if we're trying to push aside the pieces of ourself that are spiritual and just, deal with, again, the political, economic, social aspects that we're trying to attend to. But what I'm learning from eco-social worldviews is that the spiritual aspect is so much part of our being that we can't separate. It's that false dualism. And I guess I was going to ask you to speak to that. How have you been able to incorporate that, or have you been able to within the professional academic settings when it's such a huge part of your own worldview?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think for the reality is that, there has been over the last 20 or 30 years an emerging interest in the religious and spiritual dimensions of life and human development, and how that is important to social work practice. I mean, I was fortunate to be at the University of Kansas and learn under the tutelage of Dr. Ed Kanda, who was kind of the spirituality and social work guru in the profession. And in fact, we wrote an article together many years ago on spirituality and ecological practice. And so it certainly has been there over the last, I think, 30 years or more. But one of the things that wasn't necessarily a significant part of that was the connection between the natural world and spirituality. And so that was important for me to really think about that and develop some ideas and do some writing on that through the years about that spiritual religious connection between the natural world and us as human beings. And so to me, it's deeply connected and interconnected. There is this sense about how we experience the natural world has these very significant spiritual dimensions to it. It's, while you can understand names of species and scientific descriptions of flora and fauna, there is a felt sense that has deeply spiritual dimensions that tie us to, that can bring us into a deeper sense of the natural world when we experience it in those spiritual, mystical, majestic ways. And so, yeah, that's been a real important part. And I've taught many classes through the years on spirituality and social work practice and on environmental social work. And there's always been a piece in each of those classes that dealt with the spiritual aspect of that. And so it's been kind of a natural connection for me. But I think you're right. It hasn't always had that full flower in some of the social work writings on spirituality. I think that's changing, or at least I hope it is. And certainly when you read ecofeminism and deep ecology and people like Michael Zimmerman, who's written a lot about both philosophy and spirituality and its connection to our ecological awareness, it's certainly a part of the literature in other fields that have delved more deeply into that than we have as social work.
Yeah, and I would say that it has always been there within social work. It's just not privileged or mainstream,
right?
Marginalized, along with, eco-social worldviews and Indigenous people's perspectives. And it's always been there. We just have kind of relegated it to, not giving it the importance that it deserves. And I guess in my own shifting and learning and embracing and unlearning ways, it's certainly been something that I've been open to exploring a little bit more and less resistant of, but also, trying to find new vocabulary and that's beyond the way that kind of turned me off to the different aspects of spirituality that were so ingrained in, the anthropocentric worldview that I was, unlearning and rejecting. And recently I found the work of Richard Wagamese. It's called Embers, one Ojibway's Meditations. And it's a really, really small book. It has really, really impacted me and changed me and opened me up in ways to the divine and our spiritual connections with nature and kinship to all beings in such beautiful ways that I had not anticipated or had not even realized that I had been lacking. So definitely something that could be fostered more within the profession of social work and the ways that would be integrated in our worldviews and integrated into the way that we actively try to address these injustices.
Well, I think for me, and I didn't talk much about this, but my own kind of spiritual journey after I left this more traditional Christian early orientation, which involved Buddhist practices and shamanistic practices and Native American practices, really heightened and enlivened my awareness of that deep connection that these other cultural and religious traditions have that were missing in many Western traditions. And so Buddhism has had a really important impact in shamanism as well, in my own spiritual and ecological journey. And so I'm grateful for that, as you know, as I've kind of moved through my own process of evolution spiritually. And
Well, thanks for all that you've shared. Is there anything else that you have on your heart or mind that you wanted to put out there for us?
well, I'm just so very thankful that you're doing this. It's an honor for me to be involved with you in this process. It's certainly been an honor for me to work with you through the years, and I'm encouraged by the fact that we are creating, and you have created a space to talk to those people within our profession of social work who have had a significant influence through the years. Sometimes I think we forget history, and we forget our social work history, and we forget that there are many people who, not a lot perhaps, but a few anyway, who came before, who made significant contributions to the evolution of eco-social work. And I think it's wonderful that you're opening up space in order to talk to some of those folks while we still can. And I'm very pleased by that. And so I'm excited about this project. I'm excited about continuing to work with you. You have been an encouragement to my life in the many, many, many things that you do to engage yourself in environmental awareness and environmental consciousness within our profession and outside. And so I thank you very much, Meredith, and I look forward to this. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled that you wanted to be involved in this project and took your time away from the trees and just got to hang out with me and visit a little bit today. So thanks so much for all of your work in this over the years, and certainly in your assistance and mentoring me and helping develop my own understanding of these various aspects. But I appreciate your continued mentorship and friendship over the years as well. So, all right. Well, we look forward to talking more in the future, and we invite those who listen to this podcast session to offer their feedback and join in the discussion.